We come now to part 2, which is a discussion of different levels of reality. The first slide shows several levels of reality that we could focus on, namely physical reality, different kinds of conceptual reality, and underlying everything, a consciousness reality. Let us now look at each of these realities in turn. Let us start by exploring physical reality, which we experience and can observe. This ranges from galaxies, planets, to various forms of life on Earth, to psychological and social systems, technological systems, cells, molecules, atoms, and subatomic functioning. The physical reality is represented by the grey MEI dots. MEI refers to the matter, energy, information of which all things in the universe seem to be composed. This physical reality is complex and ever-changing. In other words, it is evolving. It is also dynamic because systems impact on each other and co-produce each other. This is illustrated by the connecting lines between the dots. Although physical reality may appear chaotic and discontinuous in some parts, to a large extent it is, however, orderly and displays regular and law-like functioning in time and space. This regularity is studied by science. Let us now look at conceptual reality. We can explain conceptual reality by the analogy of a house and its plan. The house that we observe in physical reality is typically built according to a plan. This plan represents the conceptual reality of the house. It is real in the sense that it contains all the information needed to build the house. Likewise, the information in the DNA of the body guides the unfolding and development of the organism. If there's a mistake in the information, there will be a mistake in the physical reality. For example, if we have a calculation error in the house, then when we build the house, it may collapse. There are different levels of conceptual reality. To stay with the analogy of the house, before we build a house, we have an idea about it. It may be vague at the beginning and becomes increasingly clearer later. We will do any amount of sketches, different kinds of plans, before there is the finally approved building plans. And even within that, there may be sub-plans like the electrical plan or the plumbing plan. Let us now look at generic levels of reality. In our figure, we distinguish 3 types of conceptual reality. Firstly, that of the individual scientific disciplines. Secondly, that of a meta-discipline from a web perspective. And thirdly, that of a meta-discipline from a field perspective. We will now discuss each of these types of conceptual reality in turn. Science deduces laws and principles from the observation of the regularity of how a specific type of system functions in time and space. This description is abstract and timeless and represents the conceptual reality of that type of system. This conceptual reality is real in the sense that it provides us with the knowledge of how we can manipulate and change this type of system in physical reality, in real time and space. Different scientific disciplines are associated with different parts of physical reality. Some disciplines study planetary behavior, others are concerned with societal behavior, the biological functioning of organisms, or cells, atoms, molecules, etc. In our figure, the different scientific disciplines are represented by the orange squares behind the MEI dots. Let us now look at conceptual reality as represented by a metadiscipline. This calls up, first of all, a discussion on the distinction between reductionism and holism. By focusing on a specific area of physical reality, a scientific discipline accumulates detailed knowledge about it. Such observations and descriptions of a system are partial. They give us partial knowledge, or knowledge of the parts, and are an outflow of our reductionistic scientific worldview. And while this knowledge of parts is useful, it nevertheless is not the whole truth about physical reality. Life is not functioning in isolated parts in et ceteris paribus manner, but it continues across different levels of life as studied by different scientific disciplines. For example, the same piece of physical reality can be viewed from the perspective of different scientific disciplines, each of which provides a different partial view of that reality, and combined they provide a larger truth. For example, we can look at the health of a person from a physiological perspective. One could also add knowledge to it from a chemical and from a physical perspective, as well as a psychological, social, and planetary perspective. Life is holistic and requires holistic theories to complement the knowledge of the parts. Holistic theories study the regularity of interaction between systems along and across levels in the system's hierarchy, and they describe the organizing principles associated with this interaction and the emergence arising from it. Emergence refers to the observation that if systems interact with each other, new properties or characteristics arise that are not present within the interacting systems themselves. This is meant by the famous slogan that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. There are different holistic theories and models, as for example cybernetics, systems theory, complexity theory, and various field theories. These different approaches share a core of concepts, but also have some unique ones that each of them emphasizes. Biomatrix theory has integrated these different approaches into one coherent meta-theory. We could do this because of some new theoretical contributions that allowed the contextualization of the diverse approaches in the field of holism. For this reason, biomatrix theory can serve as a framework for contextualizing the different holistic approaches, as well as being a multidimensional framework for holistic research in different scientific disciplines, and also acting as a framework for transdisciplinary research and dialogue. Biomatrix theory distinguishes two different holistic perspectives in conceptual reality: the web perspective and the field perspective. In our figure, the web perspective is represented by the orange net, while the field perspective is illustrated by the orange shape behind the net. Let us first look at conceptual reality from the metadisciplinary perspective of the biomatrix web, which is represented in our figure by the orange net. The concept of the biomatrix is derived from the two words bios, life, and matrix, pattern, and literally means how life is patterned or organized. The web perspective of the biomatrix illustrates that all systems in the universe are connected to each other and are interacting with each other. Within the web perspective, one can distinguish three subwebs. The naturosphere, which is the web of interacting natural systems, which gives rise to social and psychological systems, which we call the psychosociosphere, as well as the web of technological systems referred to as the technosphere. These three spheres interact with each other, mutually give rise to each other, and impact on each other. The web perspective of the biomatrix distinguishes two types of systems. Analogous to a fishing net, which consists of threads and knots, the web of the biomatrix distinguishes string-like activity systems and knot-like entity systems. Activity systems are functional systems or process systems and are typically described by a verb: to educate, to think, to produce, while entity systems are described by a noun, and examples would be the planet, the society, the person, the cell in the body, the atom, etc. The activity systems arise from entity systems and are directed at entity systems. At the same time, they connect up with each other to form supply chains that run through entity systems. So one way of looking at the biomatrix is to look at it as a web of interacting supply chains. Biomatrix theory also provides generic organizing principles for activity and entity systems and describes how they are organized and function in both time and space. Let us now look at conceptual reality from the metadisciplinary perspective of the biomatrix field, which is represented in the figure by the orange shape behind the web. There is growing scientific evidence from research in quantum physics, evolutionary biology, cosmology, and brain-mind functioning that there is a universal energy and information field that underlies all things in the universe. This field is represented by the orange shape that is behind the web of the biomatrix. It is postulated that this universal field contains the information and energy for all possible systems that have been or can come into being. More specifically, it contains all information that determines the form, function, and development of all systems within the biomatrix in both physical and conceptual reality. Within this universal field, each system has its own focalized subfield, which determines its unique unfolding. Apparently, there are no two systems that are exactly the same. The unique field of a system is illustrated by an orange dot within a knot in the web. In biomatrix theory, we refer to this as the ethos of the system. Let us now look at another level of reality, namely that associated with consciousness. This is represented in our figure by the yellow shape behind all the other levels of reality. Universal human experience, psychology, religions, and spiritual traditions suggest an even deeper reality beyond the universal energy and information field, namely that of the field of consciousness. This is depicted by a yellow shape behind the orange web and field of the biomatrix. It is the field of being in which the self of an entity system resides. The universal consciousness field that permeates the whole biomatrix suggests that all forms of life have consciousness, which is indeed suggested by various religious and spiritual traditions. The specific self of a system and its consciousness is represented by the yellow point within the ethos dot of each entity system. In the case of human beings, we are aware of being conscious, which is referred to as self-consciousness. We are not sure what form of consciousness other forms of life have. Different spiritual and religious traditions suggest that as human beings we can be aware of and function from different levels of consciousness. The typical distinction is one between the so-called lower stage of consciousness that we experience daily, like the waking, dreaming, and sleeping consciousness. But there are apparently also so-called higher levels of consciousness, which are often referred to as cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, or unity consciousness. These types of consciousness are associated with enlightenment. The knowledge of how to experience and function from these higher states of consciousness is entrenched in the various religious, spiritual, and wisdom traditions. Increasingly, consciousness research has also become the realm of conventional science, especially that of brain-mind research in general, and transpersonal psychology as well as parapsychology. There is interesting and literally mind-blowing research available on topics like prayer, meditation, and the miracles arising from that, spontaneous healing, telepathy, and various other so-called paranormal abilities. For example, the Institute for Noetic Sciences has published a considerable amount of research on these subjects.